All right, so this is the start of effectively what I call Unit 2 officially. So we will be using, as you can see, here I am, that this is Chapter 9. And for whatever reason, every textbook does sequences a little bit differently. These are, by definition, you see physical and chemical, we call methods of control. It'll touch on a little bit. You can see the differences in one of the PowerPoint slides. We look not not for a little bit until we get through. We have to talk about viruses and some genetic aspects before we get into antibiosis. Until you get into antibiotics. So this does not include them. It kind of gives you a generic idea on a little bit how they work, I think, is part of it. So this is a tremendous amount of relevance to understand, and it's useful at home as much as it's useful. It's not something everybody here is going to be responsible to do, but depending on your role, assuming it's in healthcare, you should at least be very familiar with it, and you might have to implement this or show others how to do it. So then it's good to know. It's good to know a little bit of everything. So to me, this is the first of our really clinical chapters. And to a certain extent, you can see it here theoretically. We switched to this particular microbe textbook because it's more clinically oriented. So it should suit me. It depends. I like aspects of both, and you'll see some of the slides. So we have some definitions to do. That sort of took a little bit in jest. Okay, last time, and categories, and tell you that. Okay, so all of these are methods of microbial control used when they talk about outside the body. So outside the body is the implication is this is not something you're necessarily taking internally. And really the key terms for us are going to be sterilization, disinfections, and antisepsis. And I have never seen in all 50 years the word degermation. And I'll give you my rant about decontamination. It's not much of a rant, it's really what it is. And sanitization. So it's a useful table. We'll get to the more appropriate definitions as time goes on. Wait, I didn't start yet. Did I start? I did start. Yay. When you get to my age, you forget things easily. Could one person smile? When you get to the point, where's my phone, and you're holding it, you're in trouble. And I've done that. Don't really like that. Sterilization. By definition, and again, the definition does not include prions because we do not have solid scientific evidence as to what controls their presence. You'll see when we address it, there are some theoretical levels. Destroy removes all viable microorganisms. It shouldn't say just including viruses. It should say including bacterial endospores. That's really the hardest thing, and you'll see it in the PowerPoint presentations here. To destroy. If you get the endospores, you get them all. And that's why boiling is ineffective for things. So a lot of things will be resolved by boiling. You might remember Pasteur, but not all of them. It depends. Remember, the organisms in the soil inevitably include bacterial endospores, and this is not how you get rid of them. So it should be used only in the strictest sense to materials that have been subject to this rigorous process. There's no such thing as a little bit sterile. Okay? Understand that. It either is or it isn't. And effectively, once you open a sterile pack and it's sitting there exposed for X amount of time, typically about an hour, when we think about an operating room, it is no longer sterile. As you see an operating room, you'll see a table, we'll call a sterile table, where the instruments are laid out. And many of you will be exposed. You'll see exactly how to lay it out, exactly how to handle it, how to gown, how to glove, all these things. They're so important. And I can't emphasize it enough how important this is. It's all about the technique. Everything like that, because the whole technique can be boiled down to non-sterile to non-sterile and sterile to sterile. The minute you touch something that's sterile, for instance, at that table or at an operating table, you're assisting, we're just passing instruments. We call this the sterile field. If you do this, you're automatically not sterile. That's it, done. Do that. Shoulders to waist in the field. Done. So, and it's instinctive. Something falls, and say, oh, there's a lot to this, and you'll become acquainted with this and the proper way to do these things. There's a lot, and really, it's a lot of technique nowadays. At least, and again, my context is 25 plus years old. We still have mostly surgical technicians who are trained in doing this, but a lot of times, depending on the venue, you have to be the authority. Many times, you'll be doing the instructions, depending on your role. So be familiar. This is important stuff. I hope you're getting that idea. Reserved for inanimate objects. We cannot sterilize living things. Doesn't work that way. I sterilized the skin. No, you didn't. Okay. Impractical or dangerous because just think of what we see, what we're using. And so, and all these things, and you have to understand there's no universal best method. You do this right now. You have to understand what that is. Okay. Heat, typically moist heat, number one on the hit parade, certain numbers of chemicals, X-rays and gamma rays. You'll see the chart in just a bit. Disinfection, sort of like on the road to sterilization. By definition, physical process or a chemical process, we're going to look at both, to destroy vegetative pathogens, that's growing bacteria and other entities, but not bacterial endospores. And some things are better and there's degrees of disinfection. And when you have to use things, harmful products of microorganisms, toxins from material. Boiling, okay? Pasteurization is a form of disinfection. It just happens to be used on what we call consumable stuff, eat and drink. We'll go over the numbers for it in a little bit. Not normally, it is by definition used on inanimate objects, because if you use any of these agents and the concentrations as strong as it needs to be, it would damage living tissue. Okay, so I mean, and all of these things are part of it. You're effectively pasteurizing your dishes, your silverware, whatever you put into your dishwasher, effectively is gauged to basically hold things in that way for pasteurization. You can look at the specs on the dishwasher maybe you have at home and what they are. They're supposed to be around 140 degrees Celsius, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, pardon me, for about, and it's 135 to 140 for about a half an hour. So that's what you're doing. But there's some guidelines with that as well. And these are the typical things we use. Iodine is a poor choice, I think, here, unless it's, although, because it may be effective for the purpose of a thermometer, thermometers have changed quite a bit with regard to these things that are there. And I'll get to some of the nuances there. And then antisepsis, I'll go down. Reduce the number of microbes on the human skin or other living tissue. A form of, I don't know if it's a form of decontamination. You might be able to make that case. I just don't like the terminology. It doesn't necessarily, mechanical friction is part of it, but not always. Immersing it in chemicals or both, it's very hard to do that on a patient, but I suppose you could. Okay, and alcohol, again, would not be a great example, but it's the most common, and we'll get to all these. And I'd rather talk more about hand scrubbing and appropriate uses of different materials for washing and things like that. That's all done. These have nothing to do with medicine. The term decontaminate, again, if somebody who's telling you this, go decontaminate or sanitize this, just say, yeah, I'm on my way. Happy to. Don't say Dr. Stein said this is not a medical or scientific term. It's enough that we both know. Okay. Please. Okay, cleansing technique that mechanically removes microorganisms as well as other debris to reduce contamination to what is a safe level. Safe levels are determined by governmental bodies, governing bodies. What is safe federally, state, locally, who's ever going out and inspecting the restaurants, who's ever inspecting the hospital, those are governmental things. So you know those, and you apply whatever you are instructed to do in the facility you are. They will have to comply to this, and you're inspected all the time. Get used to it. Have they talked to you a little bit about that when the surveyors are in the hospital? Oh, you don't want to be there because they can come in unannounced if there's a problem. Frequently do. A lot of places get a heads up. But the minute there's a problem and somebody reports a problem at a healthcare facility to the state, somebody might drop in at 2 in the morning and say, here's our credentials. We want to see this. You've got to know how to respond to it. And as you walk in and get ready to punch in for work, someone else will be there, states it, feds are in, Medicare's in. And you're like, oh, think of an expletive that you want to use for, I'm going to have a very bad day. They can come and ask to look at any chart, any piece of documentation, and you have to know where it is. You got it? Not easy. I'm being very frank with you to understand what this is like. It is not fun. For a lot of people, this is that's the nature of healthcare. So these governing bodies, and they have their own ways of doing it. You'll learn about it. There's one called the Joint Commission of Accreditation of Hospitals. I mean, again, a lot of times you get a heads up. Not if somebody reported something, you may not. And it's worse yet in nursing. Somebody's mad because grandma, they don't think, got treated because she didn't like what she was eating, and they call up and complain, and then you're in trouble. Maybe you're not, but it's the aggravation quotient. So these are important to all of these things, typically commercial entities, which you're really not. Okay? All the things that they do, and then they'll go in and inspect restaurants. Be watchful of that as well. So this is I love this particular chart. They've had this in here for the last, I don't know, maybe 20 years. We divide them into physical, chemical, and mechanical. The thing I would add to mechanical, to get that out of the way, okay, is to understand that I think hand washing is more mechanical than anything else. Yes, there's better agents to use, but if you only had water, or if you only had soap and water, you'd be just fine. Honestly. I mean, it's that mechanical activity. If you had nothing else to do, but you could run some water and do this, you would be accomplishing a lot. And do the experiment when I have the lab. How they're going to do it is up to them. You inoculate plates with your fingertip. It's really instructive because you can't find statistical differences in the way they're similar. Oh, that one looks a little better. It's very sort of eyeballometric, but it's not scientifically valid, I don't think. But it gives you an idea. It's hard to make a distinction. When you're sterilizing something, and you're not, poor term, when you're scrubbing for surgery, you're achieving the ultimate amount of antisepsis. And that involves the technique and particularly the agent that you're using. And we'll go into these agents when we look at chemical methods. We'll talk about betadine soap. We'll talk about chlorhexidine soap. So voila, physical. Look what the common denominator is. When we look at where things can sterilize, the big player is heat. And the biggest player of them all is right there, moist heat. Heat's comparatively inexpensive. Heat's easy to do. We can avail ourselves of it fairly easily. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to achieve sterilization, surprisingly enough, that are there. You're doing it in the lab with incineration when you're using a Bunsen burner to flame your loop. You can use an oven if you do it. Why don't we use ovens all the time? The problem is the ability of dry heat does not penetrate. We'll start looking at that. I'll talk about that in more detail. It doesn't penetrate. You have to have things single file. It's like you have a sheet pan. You put an instrument here, an instrument here, an instrument here. When they sterilize in the hospital, you take all those instruments, you put them in effectively a stainless steel boat. It's got lots and lots of holes in it, and just on top of each other, because the steam will get through where they appear to be touching. That's the penetration ability. That's really the magic of moist heat. And it's easy to do steam under pressure. Give me some water, give me some heat, give me a pressure cooker, and we can achieve that. Again, these are not, the blue here is disinfection. Radiation, we'll look at all these in detail. There are two categories of radiation. Ultraviolet, used all the time, but is not a means of sterilization. It creates significant changes in microorganisms. It's better to stop them from growing than to destroy them. Whereas when you use ionizing radiation like X-rays or gamma rays, and you're using them in the lab all the time. You did not know that. Did you ever put a new blade in there when you're doing a dissection? That little metal guy? Yes, no? Maybe Dr. Robbins does it before that. All the surgical blades, I'll bring one down. I think of it for next class. If you look closely on it, it says sterilized with gamma radiation. Don't worry. You're not going to get radiation poisoning from opening up a sterile surgical blade. I've opened up thousands of them, and I'm perfectly normal. God bless. One person chuckles, one smiles. The rest of you, it's Monday morning. I get it. Moving on. Sterilization. We use poison gas. So excited. So the next time you open up one of those neat little Q-tips, paper packet, or Band-Aid, guess what? It's poison gas. Sterilized. Don't worry, you won't hurt yourself. It's long gone. See, you learn something new every day that are there, and we'll look at the differences and the different chemical agents is quite a long list. And mechanical action, filtration is used a lot. Okay, and we even use, and certain liquids are amenable to filtration. It depends on what the liquid contains. If you know what the liquids contains, then start, and you use that more in the cooking industry and food consumption industry. And they give you again some definitions that are here. So primary targets of microbial control are microorganisms capable of causing infection or spoilage in the environment or in the body. Mixtures of microbes with extreme differences, so you have to take them all into account. And it's not traditionally, they are the gold standard still. Most resistant microbial entities. Again, we do not know enough about prions. The suspicion is that they require a little higher temperature and a little more time than the processes we'll be talking about in regular sterilization. Any process that kills endospores will invariably kill all less resistant forms. This is sort of the pecking order, and you saw this a little bit before. Okay, prions, think of them for now off the chart. Endospores, that big capsule, okay? Mycobacterium, that's tuberculosis and leprosy. Very, very hard to penetrate. So routinely using typical things, even strong bleach solutions, strong chemical agents. Staphylococcus, surprisingly resistant. Pseudomonas, you'll be sick and tired of that. Not just in the lab, we're going to use it in our lab here, but effectively it's more or less these days on all of us. It's in the soil. It's almost become not so much normal microbial growth on your, not growth is the wrong term. We call it normal flora or the normal microbe population, but inevitably it's there most of the time. Unless, you get dirt in ourselves all the time, it's there. Protozoan cysts. Remember, we're talking about different forms. They're difficult to get rid of. The trophozoites, the active form, and again, much more so than and it maybe surprises you, gram negatives, but they've got a membrane. Fungi and fungal spores, a little bit easier to destroy than you think. And notice the viruses here. These are called naked viruses. We'll get to the anatomy of them. Gram-positive and enveloped viruses. That's an interesting teaching point that we will get to. The enveloped virus, like COVID, like influenza, like RSV, the big three this time of year, are enveloped viruses. They're relatively easy to get out of our environment. That alcohol thing works pretty well for those. Get more into that as time goes on. This gives you an idea of why we use certain things. So a vegetative form, for instance, and they're making the distinction, the vegetative form is just a common form that we could take care of, okay? So with heat, moist heat, so think, this is certainly not boiling water, but maybe this is 180 degree water. I think it's 192 off the top, maybe a little bit. 180 degree water, 176 degree water, required to destroy vegetative forms, okay? Here to required to destroy endospores. So typically, they're giving you an idea of resistance package, and you can see it's only 1.5. We heat it a little bit more, very effective. The poison gas I was talking about, 1.7 times more than that. So you don't have to use a lot higher concentrations when they're getting to the point. Radiation, 4 times as much. There are liquids that sterilize. Because if you kill endospores, you kill them all. I used for 25 years in my office liquids, but you have to sterilize them. It's about time. And you can see that's the big difference. I mean, you can cleanse them in 10 minutes, but sterilize them, it's not really 3 hours. I think it's closer to 10 hours. You know, I'll tell you a little bit about that when we get to the chemicals. I have a lot of experience with that. So we use these terms, and I just gave you one. Bactericide destroys bacteria, but not endospores. That's when we get down to a sporicide. So something by definition that is sporicidal, or a process, a chemical, an agent that is sporicidal, is a sterilant. It can sterilize under the appropriate conditions. Sometimes it's not feasible to use them. So when you hear oh, it's bactericidal, it's fungicidal, it's virucidal, straightforward. Kills bacteria, kills fungi, kills viruses, different. The generic term of germicidal agents or microbicidal agents is very nonspecific. You have no idea the fact that, oh, this is a good germicide. It's like a TV commercial. This is effective against 98% of all germs. What about the 2% that can kill you? It was the old toothpaste commercial for Crest. This has been shown to be an effective dentifrice toothpaste if used on twice daily in an approved program. Yeah, it's a toothpaste that works if you use it properly. It's okay. Never argue with P&G, Procter & Gamble. They will come after you. I'm telling you this. Germicides and microbicides, chemical agents that kill microorganisms. So understand, and you're going to see this term. The term, when we get to antibiotics, this is really going to be an important term. But we're not talking about that today and won't be for a while. That's one of the major points that we use. Bactericidal agents that kill bacteria versus ones to stop the growth cycle called bacteriostatic. We'll run that down the road. Sepsis, the growth of microorganisms we don't want them. Asepsis, any practice that prevents the entry of infectious agents into sterile tissues and thus prevents infections. And so what we practice in healthcare is aseptic techniques. Sterile methods, again, it's a fine point. And again, whoever is teaching you this, you have to go with it. If they say, I want you to use sterile technique, there's not a lot of that around. Go sterilize your hands. You can't do that. They say, it would be appropriate, but that to me that's my background. You go with whatever they tell you, whoever's instructing you at the next level. From a test perspective, I would be very watchful because to me, sterile and aseptic are not interchangeable terms by any stretch. So when we talk about antiseptic agents, you can apply them directly to exposed surfaces, skin and mucous membranes, wounds, surgical incisions. We use them all the time. The most common agent that we use is an iodine compound. We'll get into why it works the way it works and how they had to modify it to make it work more effectively. Hydrogen peroxide, there's a lot of anaerobic bacteria. You're trying to do that. Okay? It would sting, but obviously the vast majority of people having this done are under anesthesia. Ordinary hand washing with a germicide soap. You can do ordinary hand washing with regular soap. Stop that nonsense. But it's nice to use germicide soap. Everybody feels better. But frankly, again, think marketing. But if I'm sure your house and your home and maybe your dorm room and wherever it is, you probably have something that says antiseptic soap or antimicrobial soap. That's fine. So again, static, not a good term. Prevent the growth on tissues or on objects in the environment. Same thing with fungi. So antiseptics and drugs often have microbistatic effects because microbicidal compounds can be toxic to human cells. I got that. And that's a fine line. When things can, it's like we're talking about, things that can damage them, many of them are living things that can damage us. You have to use them wisely. So even a acidal agent does not necessarily result in sterilization. It's all about use, and now we're getting to the parameters. What's changed in this slide, and it's still on a lot of the PowerPoints, okay? There are levels of disinfectants. So, for instance, when you talk about, we do these words, it's a critical device. if it comes into contact inside. Inside is not in your mouth, okay? Unless it breaks the skin or it breaks the lining in your mouth. Inside is not necessarily in your throat, in your esophagus, going down your alimentary canal, into urinary materials, all of those types of things, okay? Because they have a lining. So your inside is inside. You either are through the skin, if somehow the skin has been violated or you intentionally cut into it, or there has been damage here and the interior tissues are exposed. That's the definition of sterile tissues. It's a little bit different. If it's going to be sterile tissues, it must be sterilized. That's all. I mean, assuming you have the luxury of doing this, you're not in an emergency situation where you just clean something off the best you can and realize that most likely you're going to have to put antibiotics into the picture just as a precaution because it's most likely going to get infected. Okay? So critical must be sterilized. Non-critical, they only touch the skin. Blood pressure cuff, stethoscope. Pretty straightforward stuff. This is the oddball. Years ago, this is something that we typically would use with endoscopic tools. So if someone colonoscopies and what's called an endoscope, which goes in, which they look at your esophagus, your stomach, and the starter, and the duodenum, which is the first part of your small intestine's got a fancy name called EGD, esophageal gastroduodenoscopy. Not that I want you to know that, but effect and colonoscopy, they take the direct approach, if you know what I mean. Of which I have had entirely too many of those over my lifetime. And as you get older, they become something that a lot of people have to have done over certain ages every 5 to 8 years. Nevertheless, for years, they were considered semi-critical because it was only mucosal membranes. And they would use high-level disinfectants, clean it off, and soak it in a special system for about 40 minutes. And generally, a GI lab will have 2 sets, one that they're using and one that they're sterilizing. And the next patient comes in, you sterilize, you sterilize the wrong term. You disinfect the one you were using, and you get the one that is now disinfected. That's changed a little bit because now the manufacturer typically uses, it's like a suitcase with hydrogen that you put hydrogen peroxide in that will sterilize it. The reason I'm bringing this to your attention, years ago there was a big problem. If you did not know, these tools that basically are fiber optics that you look through this way, the way that we would look at the interior of a knee, which has to be, the tip has to be sterile if you're doing arthroscopy or something like that. It was here. One of my students was in the GI lab at Jefferson Hospital. That wasn't where it happened. I was teaching out at CCAC South. And she was telling me about the case, a really, really good student. I've lost track of her over 20 plus years. And she said the big problem was they didn't follow the manufacturer's instructions and it's the ports where they can take biopsies or samples or injections. That's where you have to make sure those are sterilized in a specific way to do it. They basically had one that for the patient who had HIV and effectively contaminated other people who had HIV. I don't even want to think of the lawsuit who didn't have HIV. Okay. Nowadays, because of that, most of the manufacturers, because it makes them money, sell this like suitcase system. You clean it off, you put it in there, you hook up the suitcase to whatever, and now it's now sterile. I mean, it's more expensive, but that's why I think this is less significant. I don't even think I asked you a question about it. I'm trying to give you a context for how things can happen if you don't do things. If you get something from the manufacturer, it's up to you to follow what their instructions are, because that's the only way that they're going to back it up. And that comes in use in real life. Okay. Substances that require durable solids, sensitive liquids, you can sterilize liquids. Doing it all the time. Those plates you're using in the lab, when they pour, they're solid now because when they cool, they solidify, they're liquid. Liquids, we have a great big sterilizer in the room next to the micro lab. There's nothing that works for everything. You don't generally have to think about it. If you were like me running an office where we did we sterilized all our own instruments and all our own dressing materials, you think about things like cost, what works well. Do you have to use something that you have to use critical material to dispose of. All of that goes into play. So next, if you end up running an office, you're doing that. Okay. So, and this is when how they develop how long the intervals are. Okay. Okay. All of that, fine. It's dead. Read it, it's dead. Don't care. And it takes time. Remember that growth curve? This is the reverse. This is called the death curve. And again, it's logarithmic. And so I'll show it to you. Things that play a role. It's that to me, it's not a big deal. You always assume it's a very high load and it's going to take longer. You're going to have to assume it's a mixed bag and there's going to be endospores in it. And yes, you do have to take into account the environment that you're working in. Okay. So it all changes. Okay. So factors that influence most infectants are more active at higher concentrations. I wouldn't worry about the ultraviolet light thing. How does it kill or inhibit? I want to know that. This is a big player. Interfering organic matter that plays a role. Analogy. So when you're doing your dishes at home, do you just stick them in there with all the yuck on them and let the dishwasher do its magic? No. You generally rinse them off, and if you got stuff, because it cakes on. Cheese, eggs, they cake onto that. They cake onto the utensils. The dishwasher, you wouldn't want to use, if you saw one of those, oh, I better rewash this. Same, surgical instruments are like that. The first, if you ever see instruments that come out of somebody who has operated, they are filled with every possible amount of yuck. Fat, congealed proteins, liquids, blood. Bleh. So first thing my staff was taught to do by my ex, who basically set up all the parameters. I said, no, with a BS in. Okay. Here's what we do. You gown in gloves just like you would. You put glove, you have to go through the whole sterile scrub thing, cover your hair, all that type of stuff, and you get in there and you have a big scrub area and you rinse up all that stuff and soap, and so just the way you would do something pretty thoroughly with your dishes at home. Made the broccoli cheddar soup that I did last night, and it gets pretty cakey on the bottom. Delightful, my man. Another Stein trial. Just saying. So all of this stuff plays a role. Clean it off first. If I teach you nothing else today, that's the most important thing you probably will learn. Very few things work well in the presence of organic matter. So it's best to clean it all off. There's a lot of different targets. I don't go crazy with the targets here for a reason. Because, okay, it's much more important when we talk about antibiotics. In general, most of the things that are effective basically kill or basically damage proteins. They denature proteins. The vast majority of the ways that's how these work. Some destroy membranes. Alcohol breaks apart membranes. But nearly everything else that you use denatures proteins. So unless it's something very specific, I will not typically ask you about that. We get more into like cell walls, DNA, RNA, proteins, etc. when we talk about antibiotics. Much more relevant. Because that's really how they're classified. These really are not. Most of these, can they sterilize or not? Are they safe to use? What guidelines are there? We can use them on skin or living tissue versus inanimate objects. So, I mean, they go through, and here's the chart. Don't really, I mean, this is the big player. It's with proteins more than anything else. There's different things. Yeah, I mean, you can look through all this, but to me, that's just extra stuff you don't have to know. And that's extra stuff. Really, this is the way a lot of things work. When soap is effectively a kind of bipolar compound. Okay, it's got an organic end, it's got a fat-soluble end, and a water-soluble end. When you get dirt, typically it's fat-soluble stuff. So the soap can get into that, but it's got another end when water runs that will take it off. That's how typical with your laundry detergent works that way. And there's different things. It has a charge. You're going to see we get into this. We have positively charged and negatively charged soaps. Laundry detergents, we use negatively charged soaps, typically phosphate-based soaps, and we use positively charged soaps, It's typically the major ingredient in antibacterial soap. Because if it gets on something and you put it in your mouth, it doesn't taste like laundry soap or soap that you're using like a bar soap. It's all about that. Here's the COVID thing. Enveloped virus in its envelope is susceptible to both detergents and alcohol. So, I mean, and people, if nothing else, the best thing, and believe me, I have to get that article for you. I saw in the news over the weekend. They had a list of the different things and how long they could survive on surfaces, if indeed they could survive, and how different things work. Enveloped viruses are easy to get rid of in the environment. People went so crazy during COVID, they thought it was going to, oh my God, it's going to be there forever. Somebody had COVID and they were in this room. I'll never go in the room. Yeah. Heat. Bring it. Elevated temperatures. Remember that thermal death chart? Falling off. That's why they're so important. Lower temperatures just either slow down or temporarily stop the growth cycle. All of these things play a role. We use them throughout all these areas, as well as dry heat, whether it's the open flame, flaming the loop, or we can put them in a regular oven or a special oven. Moist heat, the beauty of it, lower temperatures, shorter exposure times, the same the effectiveness. That's why we don't stick it in a regular oven. It takes, rather than taking 30 minutes, it takes a couple of hours. Whether we can only do a single stack, you'd have to have a bunch of sheet pans. Have you ever seen like a restaurant type oven with different things they put in, or a cooking show, they'll have multiple tiers that they'll utilize for that versus your oven at home. And a sterilizer, they can just sit all on top of each other. And again, coagulation and denaturing proteins. Dry heat, same deal, denatures proteins. Okay, at very high temperature, it destroys cells that are there. So dry, and that's the one where you're incinerating. That's dry heat. So just showing you a little bit about how it works. Here's the important stuff that's coming up. We probably won't get to looking at it in as much detail as I would like because it takes a little time. But the big number for sterilization with moist heat, basically, for lack of a better term, a pressure cooker, we call an autoclave. That's what we're using. Giant pressure cooker. Use your Instant Pot, works the same way. 121 degrees Celsius, 15 psi, which is pounds per square inch. And you can see the numbers vary. Typically 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the author you read. We did this. We had one in our office. I bought one when I went into practice. Suitable for a small medical office that was going to do surgical procedures. We did it for 30 minutes. Why not 15 or 20? Because we had plenty of time. I figured, make it dead. When I was teaching over at West Penn Nursing School for about 5 years, we had to do all our own sterilizing. That meant me. Same deal. I did for 30 or 35 minutes. 121 degrees Celsius for 15 pounds per square inch. The whole idea in closed systems, you will see, if you get it to this temperature, 120, which is about, don't quote me, but I think it's about 252 degrees Fahrenheit. You're superheating the steam. And when it reaches that pressure, you can look at a thermometer on it, or just look at the pressure gauge. Those will be equivalent. Sometimes you have a special instrument and inadvertently leaves that field, like somebody all of a sudden, oops, and it falls over there. In a big hospital, they'll be able to do what's called flash sterilization. What that means, they'll have a sterilizer that they can take that, assuming it's not contaminated significantly, not a bunch of gum, stick it in this, take it carefully like in a sterile container, put it into this device in 3 to 5 minutes at that higher temperature. Then it can bring it back out and it can be reutilized. A lot of times instruments are expensive. I mean, hemostat, you'll have a zillion. pair of pickups or forceps, tweezers. You have a specific instrument that you need for some specific procedure. You won't. And look at the difference in dry heat when you get yourself up. Most textbooks will tell you crank your oven about 400, what's this, 180 degrees Celsius. And you crank it into a 400 oven, I'd say an hour and a half to 2 hours. Bacteria endospores, greatest resistant. Temperatures above boiling. Vegetative cells, vary in sensitivity. And you can see there's a variety of them that are there. So vegetative cells are vegetative cells. Pathogens, doesn't matter. It can be a normal flora or it can be a dangerous pathogen. They're more or less, except they're about the same. You can't really distinguish. All of these are, and really you don't have to get too crazy about this. So you can see some of the numbers that are there. There's a wide variation, but in general, if you use the guidelines I'm going to show you, it works. This is how they came for it. They have all these numbers. Must render the product free of agents, spoilage, or disease without affecting the speed or cost of processing. Disinfection. Water bath. You can use it. All those old movies. I know you guys don't watch them like I do. Oh, I think she's having a baby. Go boil some water. I mean, it's the best you can do under a short period of time. Clean stuff off. A single processing 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit will not kill all resistant cells. Okay, it's a disinfection. 30 minutes boiling water will kill most of everything, including resistant species of tubercle bacilli and staphylococci. The items can be easily recontaminated once you remove them. Sterilized item, and really the clock doesn't start ticking until you begin to expose them to the air. It's a little bit different, which brings us, and maybe it's the last topic, is pasteurization. Pasteur, the numbers are typically about this 62.5 degrees Celsius for approximately 30 minutes. That was what he came up with when he did all the stuff with the ball. It's called the batch. You go to, if you go to a fine winery on a trip to France, they're doing the batch. Doing exactly the Pasteur did because it works forever. Commercially, it doesn't work. If there's money, time is money. So when you're sterilizing something that you pasteurizing something, all the things we can all consume pasteurize. They found another method. They found that if they bumped it up to about 72 degrees Celsius, depending on the order, it's called the high temp, short time. 15 to 20 seconds. That's the way most of the stuff that we consume is pasteurized. Special equipment, they can bring it up to temp, they'll pass it through like a magic passing through a superheated tube, and then holding it that temperature and leaving it there for 15, 20 seconds. The things that are different are things that are pasteurized with high fat is hard. So if you're talking about ice cream, if you're talking about full fat dairy products, heavy products like that, you typically have to crank it up another 10 degrees Celsius, whatever that comes out to be. And again, same kind of interval, 15, maybe 30 seconds. Okay. Fatty consumable. Depending, consume dairy, what dairy you get, wide variation. What is not the same as this? Ultra pasteurization. Next time you open a juice box, next time you go to some like sheets and they have those little open, you can tear them open with little fancy creamers in one of those places. Here, you just just had them. We had a combination of half and half that's in those little. Those are sterile containers. Ultra pasteurization is about 140 degrees hotter than Celsius for a matter of seconds. What they basically, it's really, they superheat brief contents. They're going in and they superheat the container. The vapor phase evaporates because we press vapor phase, hydrogen peroxide. But those suitcase systems use vapor phase, hydrogen peroxide. Peroxide's great because it evaporates. Same with oil, with alcohol. The best thing about it is it evaporates quickly, no residue, no aftertaste. So there's a lot of different ways that we will look at. So that little container, that juice box, I saw it. If you ever go to Ontario, go to the Science Center there in Toronto. It's brilliant. They had a big thing, and on the third floor, there's 5 floors. They happened to have a display when we were my kids ages ago, and they were showing how to make they were making like chocolate milk and putting it in boxes. Where do we get our dairy? We go to the refrigerated section in the store, right? I do that. You do that. If you go to Europe, they don't. It's sealed in containers. They don't refrigerate it until they open up. A refrigerator, and typically in Europe, is about the size of your dorm refrigerator, maybe a little bit bigger. They don't have that giant one with the double doors and the big like we have. Oh my God, I'll dig around in here. Where do we put it? Because they buy their food every day. They put you when you open up the dairy when it goes in. It's the way it works. We are in love with refrigeration. It is a whole different culture. They're in love with going out to the market every day or two, buying what's in the market and making it. It's a whole different culture. I understand it. So you have to understand where we are, it's a different kind of a thing. Okay. So we'll stop it here. I'll show you the numbers better, and we'll really talk about autoclaving and undoubtedly get done with physical methods on Wednesday. Thank you.